Book 8, The Last Day, Chapter 5, The 34th Day of Planting, A Very Long Day, Part 1 of 12. The sun wouldn't be rising for another couple of hours, but Pedo-Shin had to do something, anything, besides lying in bed staring at the darkness. "Where are you going?" Lila asked sleepily as he slipped out of bed. He kissed her on the cheek. "I'll be back by breakfast, or midday meal, I promise. I just need to something," he faltered. There were too many thoughts, too many images for him to even consider resting. This was going to be one of the most significant days the world had ever experienced, and he needed to get an early start on it. He still didn't think of himself as General Shin, but maybe the descendant of 3 General Shins could stop a war. If not, it just might be a very long day. Mari slept fitfully that night, likely the last in her beloved house, and it was because she dreamed. But this was no dream like before, about her weathered gray house and gardens and children. It was much bleaker. She was on a boat of some sort, really just boards lashed together with rope, and sat gripping them desperately. It was a cloudy night, cold and bleak, and she was balancing precariously on the boards. They bounced and heaved on black waves. She strained to see anything around her, but there was no end to the water. It must have been like the seas she had seen only in paintings, water that went on forever. But just before her, she could make out something in the distance. A shore, littered with enormous rocks. Not the most hospitable, but certainly better than the heaving water. Suddenly she felt a body next to her. She looked over and saw, clinging to the boards with her, Jatsi. With terror-filled eyes, she looked back at her mother. Mari had an idea. "Jatsi, it's not that far. If you get into the water, I can push you to the shore. Swim your hardest and you'll be all right." Jatsi slipped down into the dark wetness. Mari gave her a push, stronger than she'd ever been. The force of her shove sent Jatsi all the way to the shore, where she grabbed hold of the rocks and waved back to Mari in relief. Mari couldn't rejoice for long because she noticed another person by her side, Salima. "Do the same as your mother," Mari told her. "Get in the water and I will push you to shore." Salima, with great trepidation, splashed into the water. Mari gave her a mighty push, and soon Salima was at the shore, Jatsi helping her stand up. "What about me, Mugga?" Mari smiled at the person next to her, Ralph. "I can get you all there," she declared, and she did. She pushed Ralph, Jory, Cambo, all of them, even little plump Perrin, all the way to the shore, where the rest of the family eagerly held out their hands and pulled them to safety. The air around Mari began to grow colder. The waves lapped higher, and she realized a harsher storm was on its way. There was only one person left to get to shore. "Swim with me, Mother," Pedo said to her. "We'll go together." "I can't," Mari told him. "I can only push." "Then how will you get to shore?" "I'll find a way. Now go, they're waiting for you." She shoved him into the water and gave him a mighty push, propelling him all the way to the shore. Before he reached it, Mari felt even colder. The lashings holding her boat together were coming apart. The boards separated, and Mari found herself flailing to grab hold of them. But the waves pushed them beyond her reach. She gasped and kicked and tried to keep her head above water, but all her strength was gone. She looked to the shore, assured that all of her family was safely there. Her eyes locked with her son just as he stood up out of the water, just as she ducked below the waves. Mari sat up abruptly in bed, her face drenched and a chill rushing through her. She knew what the dream meant. Her family would be safe, but she wouldn't reach the shore. She woke again to the first light of dawn trying to burn into her window. She never closed the curtains last night, still looking for other candles lit somewhere, anywhere. Over on the bedside table was the book, the writings. She recalled with extreme clarity the words she heard over and over in her head. Yes, Mari Pedo Shin, it is you. They were still repeating, impossible to ignore. A small wicked part of her wanted to murmur, "Shut up," but there was nothing she could do. She sat up, gulped, and wondered how she would fill the hours until she greeted the army of Idemia. Sometimes, my darling daughter, the world really is out to get you. Like today, for instance. I really need to clean something. It was going to be a very long day. Young Pear opened his eyes and saw the sunrise over the canyon's edge. For some reason, he took note of the color of the sky, something he had rarely done since he left Salem. Mugga always drilled that into their heads, almost maniacally. What color is the sky? No one dared to answer her without first looking out a window, which was what she expected. But for almost 2 years he had assumed, like everyone else in the world, that the sky was blue. It may appear to be another color for the moment, but underneath it all, it was always blue, right? No. It was important to see what color the sky was at that moment. And this morning it was a surprisingly deep red, almost like blood. Or poppies in bloom. He couldn't decide which. He sat up and noticed the rest of the army was rising early, too. Even Amory must have awakened hours ago to prepare her clothing, hair, and face, using the supplies she had lugged on her back for the past few days. Obviously, she wanted to make an impression when she returned to Salem. Gone were her muddied men's clothes. She was now dressed in an impractical purple silk, with breeches so wide that they looked like a skirt, and a flowing tunic embellished with gold and silver accents. Over that she wore a shimmering red cloak to stave off the cold. If only Guide Lannard had caught up to them, young Pear thought with a smirk, Salem would see the two of them sparkling for miles away. Amory's hair was piled high on her head, with strategic locks cascading down her overly painted face. She probably thought she looked beautiful. But there was nothing real or genuine on her anywhere. Even her chest seemed to be inordinately accentuated. Maybe that was where she stuffed her filthy clothing. She was absurd, and for no good reason. If they were following the plans, no Salemites would ever see her, since they were already on the trail to the ancient temple site. Young Pear eyed the wall to his left and sighed. He knew exactly where he was, and the army would definitely reach Salem today. The soldiers got up and handed their bedrolls to a major and his lieutenant, who was calling for them. In a few minutes, they would begin to tie them together for a long rope. It was the only way to get over this wall, over 50 feet high, and placed in such a steep section of the canyon, there was no hope of climbing around it. Young Pear wondered how tall the last wall would be. No matter its height, Salem would be seen and recognized from the top of it. The wall they were currently readying to scale was in a dip in the canyon, preventing a clear view into the valley beyond. But the wall at the narrow entrance would likely be the most formidable, just to slow down the army that much more. Young Pear thought of it with excitement and worry. For the past 4 days he wanted nothing more than to be back in Salem. He would be the first over the wall by Thorne's orders. But what if Salem didn't want him back? It would be a very long day. The sun was beginning to rise in the east. The old man sat near the edge of the cliff, about 60 paces before the temple ruins, and looked out at the valley below. The surprisingly warm air for the past couple of days had melted all the snow on the immense table section of the mountain where he sat. He considered that a tender mercy from the Creator. There wasn't even mud to make camping there unpleasant. All that remained was soft, damp grass, quite comfortable for sleeping on. Jotham Hifadi knew all about camping. He and his wife Asrar, who was still dozing soundly in a tent behind the temple site, had spent years living in forests and caverns above Edge. Last night was perfect. He glanced behind him to see a steady, quiet stream of people already arriving. They most likely slept on the trails and woke at the first light, and now they were emptying out of the forest onto the tableland. 2 routes ended much further north, in the safer and more sheltered areas of the plateau. The northern route and the upper middle routes went along the tops of the mountains to reach the back, while the lower middle and Idumean trail converged to the south of the site, following the mountain tops to spill out just before the ancient temple, the route which Jotham could now observe. The last trail, the one in the middle, not yet used by anyone, was called the Back Door. While it was short, it was also very steep. It originated near the river that bisected Salem, the quiet lands that remained untouched and as pristine as when guide packs first saw the land. The only structure there was the temple on the far eastern side of Salem at the mouth of one of the canyons. Since no one lived near the back door, it wasn't expected that anyone would really use it. And since the last few hundred paces required climbing a rock face, it also wasn't an option for the elderly or young children, or those squeamish about heights. Jotham nodded in satisfaction that the Salemites were filing in almost reverently. The only other sound he heard that early morning was the tapping of Ralph Shin's chisel and hammer. He started working as soon as there was enough light to see the stone into which he was carving their story. Thousands of Salemites were already here, and more would pour in for the rest of the day, stragglers arriving perhaps tomorrow. And then? He could hear people calling softly to each other as they arrived, congratulating and greeting each other, mostly at the ruins. Apparently everyone had told each other to meet there, somewhere along the elaborately carved pillars that soared 50 feet into the air, or among the large blocks of rubble covered in vines and shrubs, or along the wide stone steps leading up to where the front entrance used to be. Jotham smiled to think that by tomorrow people would be climbing on top of each other, trying to find their family and friends. Last night he watched a middle-aged woman stand there for 2 hours, wringing her hands with worry, until a man with graying hair, probably her husband, came to lead her gently away. She would likely arrive soon again, waiting for someone to come. But maybe she already found whomever she was searching for. He prayed last night that she would. Jotham looked back down into the valley. It was hard to imagine that soon it would be filled with the army of Idumea. Right now it was peaceful and quiet. But the valley was deceptive. Anyone from Salem who went there could feel it. Cold heaviness that weighed one down. It was even hard to walk in there, as if carrying an extra 100 pounds on one's shoulders. Anyone who spent more than a day there became excessively irritable, angry, and violent. Long ago it was realized that the valley had been the site of many other last days. It was the place where evil came to destroy the faithful of the world who took refuge at the large tableland behind him. And where evil fell, it never seemed to fully leave. It was as if the spirits of those who died there were too terrified to go to the dark desert prison. But here there was no progress, just anger and heaviness and guilt. No Salemites ventured there if they didn't have to, and none did today either. That's why Jotham squinted, then squinted again in the distance at where one of the canyons emptied out into the valley. It wasn't the canyon where Guide Gleese had prophesied the army of Idumea would come, but one to the west. He was sure he saw the early sunshine flash off something shining in the distance. He watched for a few minutes, then finally turned around. "Caboche," he called to a young woman behind him, picking up firewood. "And you, he snapped his fingers at a young man helping her. Perrin's grandson. Looked just like him." Caboche chuckled as the young man blushed. "His name's Q Shin, Grandpa Jathan." Her great-grandpa nodded his head that used to be crowned with black hair, but was now faded gray, much like his skin. "Sorry about that. Q? As in the letter, like R or W?" The gangly boy shrugged. "Just a family name, Q." "As in cute," Caboche whispered. Q, not sure he heard her correctly, glanced at her, but Jathan chuckled quietly. There had already been one Shin-Hefati marriage. There might be another some year, if... Jathan didn't know how to think about the future. There wasn't one, as far as he knew. "Q, Caboche, come over here." "What is it, Mr. Hefati?" Q said as they approached. Still carrying the wood, they squatted next to him. Q had been relieved of Grunnock duty that morning, since his siblings Lori, Jory, Newell, and Canthe arrived last evening with his brothers-in-law, their children, his cousin Miki and her husband Clyde, and many Travato cousins. "Your eyes might be sharper than mine, so look out there," Jathan gestured. "At the second canyon from the east, at the end of the valley. Do you see a glint of something shiny?" "I'm still trying to see the end of the valley," his great-granddaughter chuckled. "Me too," Q admitted as he squinted in the distance. "Sit down properly, both of you," Jathan directed. "Relax your bodies, then relax your minds. Then let your eyes drift along the edge of the valley there in the distance. It might take a moment." The teenager sat down and stared out into the distance. The rising sun passed a peak and shone brighter into the valley. "There!" Q said suddenly. "I saw something. The second canyon." "I see it," Caboche said. "Two glints, right?" Jathan sighed. "That's right." "What would cause that, Grandpa?" Jathan watched for another moment before answering. "Metal." "Metal?" asked Q. "Like..." "Swords," Jathan said heavily. Q and Caboche looked at each other in alarm. But that's not the right canyon, is it?" Q asked, slightly panicked. "No, it's not the Idumean Canyon, nor is that the main body of the army. It's probably a group of soldiers who got lost." "So not too big a worry?" Caboche asked. Jathan shook his head. "Any soldier is a worry, my dear. They find out where we are, they get a little ambitious, and they try to come up here. Or they return and tell Thorn too soon where we are before everyone else is ready." Q and Caboche exchanged fearful looks. "Mr. Hefati, what do we do?" Q said. "We watch them for another 15 minutes. Unless they have a spyglass, they can't tell what's going on here. They may just go into the next canyon and get lost on their way to Salem again." "But what if they don't?" "Then, Q Shin, you find a horse abandoned at one of the springs and ride as fast as you can to find your Uncle Shem. This might be turning into a very long day." "Well, it is a valley," said one of the soldiers, looking around. "Yes, it is," said another. The sergeant put his hands on his waist. He and his 14 men had arisen early and set out to find their way to Salem, or their way out. He wasn't expecting this. "If we had just walked another few hundred paces last night, we could have camped here instead of in the canyon." "The canyon was fine," said an older soldier. "Something about this valley, though." "Look at it, it's perfect," said a young man. "What a great place to start a village. Flat and no ash here. Look how lush it is. Corn would grow twice as tall here, I'm sure of it." One of the soldiers said, "What did Thorn say about claiming houses and land?" The sergeant's eyebrows rose. "He said whoever found something first got to claim it." "We saw this first, sir." The sergeant nodded. "Yes, we did. Split 15 ways, that's quite a bit of land, men." "Wait a minute, I saw it first. All of it is mine." The sergeant looked at him. "We all got here at the same time. It's all of ours. You're just going to steal it from me?" "Steal? I didn't hear you claim this." "I claim it now," shouted another soldier. "No, I do." The sergeant drew his sword. "Enough. There's enough here for all of us. I'm the leader of this group according to Thorn's staff sergeant, so I declare when the battle is over, I will divide this parcel into 15 shares. Then each of you will get to choose one share." "No, that's not—" "Sarge!" cried one man. He was holding a spyglass and looking off into the distance. "Sarge, I think I see movement above the cliff." "What?" The sergeant marched over and snatched the spyglass out of his hands. "How can that be?" He held it up and focused. A moment later he lowered it. "There are people up there," he said softly, as if they could hear him so far away. "Not a lot, but enough that they might be trying to stake a claim on our land." The other 14 soldiers shifted in agitation. "Not our land, they don't. This is ours. We saw it first. We get to take it. Sarge, can we take them?" The sergeant spied again at the cliffside. "I see only a few people, a couple of children, an old man. Nothing we can't handle." He put down the glass and looked at his men. 10 swords, 2 archers, 3 long knives. Oh yes, we can take care of this." One of the men licked his lips. "So what do we do?" "Simple. We walk over there, climb the cliff, kill who's ever there, then send word to Thorn that we have claimed this land." But the older man shook his head slightly. "I don't think this will end well." "Not for them, no. What, are you scared?" The older man stiffened up. "Absolutely not," he said as he drew his sword. "Time for me to get my own land." Versa opened her eyes, stretched, and stood up. She'd always enjoyed sleeping in barns. The hay really was quite comfortable. Once she laid a blanket over it to keep the scratchy ends from poking her. She'd learned that trick long ago as a child, during one of the many times she and her family were on the run, stealing into barns for the night to stay away from the soldiers. She peeked out of the barn door to the house. It seemed empty, just like the rest of the neighborhood. Last night she wasn't sure, so she didn't dare enter the house. But she didn't mind a second night in the cozy barn. In many ways, she felt most at home with all she owned on her back, and her future wherever her feet would take her. For the past 2 days, she'd been on the run again, so to speak, and she'd eased back into her old ways. She picked up her pack and walked confidently to the house, not wanting to use up her rations if she didn't need to. In the kitchen, she found plenty of dried fruits, jerky, and a forgotten loaf of bread, not too stale. Alone at the kitchen table, she ate her breakfast and considered her route for the day. In case she ran into a straggler, her southern progress would be suspicious. She would sneak through gardens and orchards just to be safe. The roads in Salem were bare now, with everyone moving to the west. She snooped through the cabinets to see if there was anything else worth taking, and shoved a piece of hard cracker bread into her bag. After hefting the pack on her bag, she slipped out of the house. The barn she had chosen was well off the main roads, where Cephas Brighter, Pedoshin, and Shem Zenas and his assistants frequently rode to make sure the evacuation was progressing smoothly. Versa couldn't see or hear another living soul. Salem was disturbingly silent. She set her focus on the southern canyon and started to walk, hoping it wasn't going to be a long day. "Zadok, what about this one?" Deck led a horse over to him. The pasture lands before the route entrance was filled with hundreds of horses, grazing among the abandoned wagons. Already new travelers and wagons were stopping to unhitch their horses, give them a pat goodbye, and start up the trail on foot and with pack horses. A few of them nodded to the Breiters, Zenuses, and Shins in the field retrieving usable animals. "We didn't check this one yet, did we? His shoes look good." Zadok tipped his head. "No, I'm pretty sure we didn't. He looks well rested, too." "Hogle," Dek called over to his nephew. "Come take this one." The 14-year-old jogged over and nodded at the painted horse. "I like him." "Well, I don't," scowled 10-year-old Yanali Breiter, sitting on a nearby rock. "His face is only half brown." 11-year-old Sentia rolled her eyes. "It's only for a few hours, Yanali. Mugga or someone else can ride him." "Not that one for Mugga," Dek told them. "He's too lively. Put that one on my side of the barn, Hogle. Your Aunt Jatesy can handle him, but I'm still looking for the right horse for Mugga." Hogle mounted the painted horse to bring him back to the barn. He met 12-year-old Atlee Breiter going back to the pasture lands. "I like that one," Atlee told him as he passed. "Good, 'cause your sister doesn't. He'll be Aunt Jatesy's today." Atlee nodded. "There's plenty of feed in the barn now, although I don't think the girls like shoveling it too much." "Then they should bring the horses back to the barn." "They would like that even less." As Hogle approached the barn between the Shins and Breiters, he saw his Aunt Jatesy coming out. "Oh, I like that one." "Good, because Uncle Dek says it's yours today." She walked over to Hogle and took the reins as he dismounted. "Been a while since I've ridden. Did he handle well?" "Really gentle," Hogle said. "I thought he should be for Mugga, but Uncle Dek says he's looking for just the right horse for her." Might take him all morning," Jatesy mused. "We need something old and mellow, yet fast." "I don't think they usually come in that combination," Hogle told her. "I know," she chuckled. "But the Creator will help them find the right animal before this afternoon, don't you think?" Hogle smiled at his aunt and started back to the fields. Jatesy led the horse into the barn and tethered it near the first one Atlee brought in. 9-year-old Mora Shin moaned. "Already another one? I just got water for the first." Her cousins Tabit and Banu Breiter, pitching straw, frowned. "Want to trade?" 14-year-old Banu offered. 16-year-old Tabit held out a pitchfork. "No." Mora dashed out of the barn with the bucket. 16-year-old Hulda Zenas and her 18-year-old sister Esther laughed at their cousin. "Maybe I'll go help her," Esther suggested. "I can carry 2 buckets, and I have a feeling the horses will start coming faster." 9-year-old young Shem Breiter leaned on his pitchfork. "I still don't know why I'm stuck working with all the girls." "Because you like being inside, remember?" Sakal Shin said. Young Shem looked around the barn. "This really isn't inside." "Oh, get moving, young Shem," his mother said as she playfully slapped his rear. "Everyone is doing different kind of work today. I hear another horse coming." Jatesy left the barn with a chuckle. She never imagined seeing the girls and her youngest son working in the barn. The miracles just kept happening. And maybe another one was arriving. 13-year-old Sakal was approaching on a small, stocky horse. "What do you think?" she asked her aunt. "Uncle Dek thinks Mugga could handle this one." Jatesy nodded thoughtfully at the tan animal. "Small, steady, and hopefully not ready to drop dead halfway up the mountain. Yes, this might do. But tell your Uncle Dek that if he finds any horses a little younger than Mugga, that would be good too." Sakal laughed and jogged back to the field. John Offra leaned against the gray, scraggly tree, appearing nonchalant, even though the dead branches were poking him in the back. In one hand was a chunk of wood, a new whittling project Teeman had given him, to teach him how to use a knife for something other than ending someone's life. John was trying to carve it into a bear, but he kept whittling too many sharp points on it. It was odd behavior for the army of Idumea to behold. A tall, distinguished man with blonde gray hair at the side of the canyon, whittling. He wasn't guarding the small canyon that branched off behind him. Quite the contrary. Last year, Salem's hope had been to wall up all of the canyons as a lure or diversion. But then the snows came early, and the construction had to stop. The main walls had been erected, however, so that had to suffice. Still, there were many routes breaking off into blind canyons, and there was no reason not to make use of them. In front of such a one, Timon, who was hiding in a cluster of shrubs, had placed John, who was now commenting loudly as he worked on his whittling project. "Yes, sirree, much calmer and quieter in that little canyon behind me." He tipped his head backward to indicate the sheltered, narrow passage, where already a few dozen men had decided to end their army careers and take a well-deserved break. In the patches between the snows, soldiers had laid out their packs and were closing their eyes in the first rays of the sun that reached them. "Yes, sirree, no last-day doom can reach them there. No, the Creator won't send His destruction to that canyon," he continued in a convivial and very loud voice. "Great place to spend the last day in peace, I'd wager." Soldiers passing him on their way to yet another depressing gray wall hesitated, partly because of the backlog of men trying to climb the wall, partly because the brass buttons on Ofra's jacket were so mesmerizing and enticing, just like his words. "Safety assured leaving east of Metaceti," he announced. "Right there behind me, that's where the safety is, where space is, where rest and comfort and anything else you really want is. No one will care that you left the army. No one really wants to do this." He gestured with his carving knife at the imposing block wall before them. That's when the murmuring would begin, the mutters of, "I don't really want to do this either." "Another wall? They're not climbing the wall, are they? Not getting in trouble either, are they?" Jealous glances would be sent to those who had quit the army for meadow life. Eyes would dart back and forth, making sure punishment wasn't around some corner. And then a half-dozen or so men would sidle closer and closer to the tall whittling man, still announcing, "Safety behind me, destruction in front of me. Decision seems pretty clear." Abruptly, the defector sprinted from the crowd of a few hundred men to the quiet solitude of the side canyon, grinning in triumph and being greeted with cheers by those who had left the army only a few minutes before. Occasionally an officer strode angrily up to Ofra, ready to shout him down or worse. But John would calmly lift his head and glare with the power of a shin. Maybe it had something to do with the jacket, but no officers dared contend with John. They suspected he was Colonel Ofra, but something about that jacket, the brass buttons, the older insignias, well, that jacket wasn't supposed to be there. None of them were supposed to be there. More than one officer surely intended to take down John Ofra, wanted to pull out his sword and dispatch the oldest officer in the army, who was supposed to be dead already, and make him that way. But they didn't. They couldn't. It was as if there was some kind of invisible shield, some kind of protection around him, that pulsed a feeling of inevitable doom to whichever man considered raising a sword to Ofra. Maybe it was the little old man who sat higher on the rock on the slope. Maybe he radiated down that threatening feel, as if he were a rain cloud hovering nearby, with lightning ready to strike. Ofra was oddly untouchable. To the men who slipped past Ofra and trotted back into the narrow canyon, the officers only sent glances of envy. Then, obediently, they continued on with the rest of the army to the next wall. Soon the next wave of soldiers were funneled into the walled canyon, groaning at the sight of yet another blockade. And soon they'd find themselves bemused by the tall man who was whittling what was a bear but now resembled a porcupine, who'd start telling them, "Yes, sirree, much calmer and quieter in that little canyon behind me." Up on the cliffside, the three figures hadn't moved for 15 minutes. They kept their focus on the occasional flashes of light that bounced off of the swords in the distance. "Concentrate on that lead flash," Jothan said. "If they're going into the next canyon, we'll see it next past the large boulder there. If not, it will stay to the right of it." "How often did you do this, Mr. Hafati? Watching bits of light in the distance?" Jothan chuckled lightly but maintained his gaze. "For years, Q, years. When we didn't have anyone traveling the routes to safety, I'd sit high in the trees at the edge of the forest and just watch. I always knew which flash of light was Colonel Shin's. It bounced off your great-grandfather Ralph's sword like nothing else." Q smiled and tried to keep focused on the first sword. "Grandpa," Caboche whispered after a moment, "it's not turning, is it?" Jothan was silent as they continued to watch. The glints continued in a straight path. Q shifted nervously, waiting for the word. "I think it's still coming toward us, Mr. Hafati." Jothan sighed. "You're both right," he finally admitted. "Ralph may need to stop carving and start getting these people behind the ruins and as far back as possible. Yes. Caboche, go tell Ralph to get everyone moving and come back to me for an update every 5 minutes. I'll try to get an estimate on the rate of their progress. Q, find the fastest horse you can, take it down to the States, and tell Shem that the sergeant major will be needed here." Q was getting up, but stopped midway. "What was that? The sergeant major?" Jothan nodded, not once taking his eyes from the distance. "Only an experienced sergeant major can handle this. Tell Shem that Jothan Hafati said the day has finally come for him to remember his training. Perrin's orders. He'll know what that means. Go." Q jumped and ran with Caboche to give Ralph the news. Then he continued on to find a horse. Ralph dropped his tools and rushed to the ruins. "Move! Move to the back! Now!" His brother Newell joined him, trying to get people up and going. Con and Sam stood up groggily from their campsites, Ralph's shouting having woken them up. They saw their brothers-in-law waving frantically at stunned people milling around the ruins. The Cadby brothers looked to the cliff and saw the old scout sitting there, studying something in the distance. "This doesn't look good," Sam said to Con. His brother nodded, and together they started rousing their exhausted wives and scooping up their babies. Less than a minute later, Q was on the most rested Clark he could find, racing down the mountain. Down the slope, merely half an hour's walk away from the top of the trail, Lek was guiding the horses carrying his sons and leading the train of Zenuses, Shins, and Briders. They had made some progress up the mountain the night before, but Ariliz was in tears of silent misery when they reached the camping meadow. Salima took one look at her and announced to the party, "We're camping here for the night." No one complained. The wriggly little ones were more than ready to run around, and Ariliz wept in relief as Holling laid her down on a soft bedroll. The large group was up at daybreak and were on the trail when Q was racing down it on a parallel track so as not to get into the way of any of the steady stream of Salemites. Lek frowned at the approaching rider. "Someone's going the wrong way," he called out to the family behind him, "and in a hurry." But Heisey, a few horses behind, recognized her brother. "Q?" Lek spun as Q shouted something as he rode past. Holling Brighter, at the back of the train with Ariliz and Salima, understood his shout. "What'd he yell?" Cambo Brighter called down to him. "Soldiers!" "No," Lek whimpered, the reins going slack in his hands. Cambo turned to Lek. "Throw the reins to Brighter and mount up with me. Wives and children, he shouted to the rest of the family. "Stay on the trail, but stop before you get to the ancient site. Stay hidden in the forest until all is clear. Boys, let's go see what's happening." "Papa?" Brighter called in a panic as Lek handed him the reins. "You'll be all right," Lek assured him, trying to remain calm himself. "Mama's coming." Salima was already riding up on the other side, holding plump Perrin in the wrap secured to her front. She and her son slid off the horse and took the reins from Brighter so Lek could climb up behind Cambo. The 7 men quickly shifted children to wives and sisters and rearranged riders and horses, but Holling paused and gazed at his ailing wife. Araliz smiled bravely. "I'm fine. No pains. They need you more than me. Ride." The men kicked their horses and galloped up the trail. Jatsi sighed when she saw Baskos, Noria, and their 2 little ones walking up the lane from their house with Shem and Kala. Another farewell. "Come to choose a good horse for your ride to the site?" Jatsi called to them. "I'm getting quite the collection this morning." Baskos smiled. "Noria's family should be here soon, but I suppose we could go horse hunting in case what they bring isn't satisfactory." "The world calls it shopping, Baskos. You're not out to shoot anything," Jatsi smiled. Shem was looking around. "Pato still out?" "Lila said he didn't think he'd have much success with the Eltana," Jatsi explained, "but he wasn't sleeping this morning anyway." "Well, maybe he's having some success. Where's Mari? She wanted to say goodbye." "She's hiding in the house, cleaning things," Jatsi gestured. "She didn't want to face the horses, and she also doesn't want to leave a dirty house this afternoon." Noria and Kala nodded in understanding, but Shem waved his arms in disbelief. "I will never understand that. Who's going to see the house?" Kala patted him. "It has nothing to do with pride, but everything to do with gratitude. The house is being thanked for its service to us. We just want our houses to feel clean before the soldiers do whatever they'll do to them." Shem shrugged. "Little Kalia and I will get Mari. Baskos, see if there's anything you want to hunt in the barn." Jothan, now lying at the edge of the cliff to be less conspicuous, twisted to see the progress behind him. He nodded in relief that 7 more of Perrin and Shem's male descendants had arrived and were helping move people to the back of the tableland. "Leave the bedrolls and packs," he muttered. "They'll be able to come back for them in a while. Just go." He noticed his great-granddaughter explaining the situation to a newly arrived family, and he beckoned for her to come over to him, crawling. As she neared, he said, "Kabish, tell Ralph or whoever is acting in charge that the soldiers have picked up their pace. I estimate they'll be here in less than an hour. I'm counting on them struggling on the trail to the cliffside, but we shouldn't assume that we have more time than that." Kabish fingered her long black braid in worry. "Grandpa, maybe you should come back with me now." "I know how to be invisible, Kabish," he assured her, "and I've been waiting many years to see this. I'll roll behind that large rock when they reach the top of the trail, but you better be running for the back by then." She kissed him quickly on the cheek and peered cautiously over the edge. Far below were the 15 soldiers in a steady jog. She uttered a little yelp of fear and rushed back to the Shin and Zenas men, who created a line just before the ruin. They were instructing newcomers where to go, looking behind them frequently for updates. Kabish's dark skin was flushed when she announced to her cousin Wes and his in-laws, "Less than an hour now." Ralph, Lek, and Cambo, the oldest sons of each family, shared the same anxious look. "Q should be reaching the estate soon," Ralph said. Lek nodded. "Then another 5 minutes and Papa should be on his way up here." "How fast can this route be done?" Cambo asked. "Trying to remember," Bubba said. "Papa did it just for fun once many years ago. Remember, Cambo?" "We were just young," Cambo said, rubbing his forehead in Perrin fashion. but I want to say he made it in much less than an hour on that really fast horse he borrowed. He was trying to prove he didn't need to go on the marking trip that year, wasn't he?" Bubba shrugged. "I don't remember, but less than an hour?" "The horse nearly died, though," Campbell reminded them. "Much less than an hour would be good," Lex said, watching Jotham Hifadi at the edge of the cliff. "There are a lot more horses available for the ride down," Ralph agreed. Dek heard the noise coming down the hillside, sounding like a bear crashing through the woods, and he spun in alarm. The steady stream of Salemites to his right, heading up the route, also looked, but relaxed when they realized it was just a teenager rushing down on a horse. But Dek knew something was wrong. "Q?" Panting, Q reined the horse to a stop in front of his cousin. "Zadok, where's Uncle Shem?" "At Bosco's house. They're going to leave soon." But Q was already kicking the horse into a frothy run to the estates. Zadok and Dek grabbed the nearest horses and mounted. "Papa?" Atlee shouted. Hogel, Sentia, and Yanali stared as Dek and Zadok joined the race back to the estates. "Does this mean I get to choose the horse I want now?" Yanali said. "Mari, Mari, the house looks fine," Shem called. "Where are you? You have to leave something for Lila to do when she gets back from the rectory." "Here, Shem," he heard her voice down the hall. He found her in young Pear's room. "Oh, Mari." "Just so he knows we were waiting." She smiled feebly and gestured, a little embarrassed, to the large sign above his bed, charcoal written on a white bed sheet. "Young Pear, we had to leave. You know the way to us. Please hurry. We're watching and praying for you. All of our love, everyone." "I ran out of space to write everyone's names," she apologized. "But I think he'll recognize my handwriting, and he'll see we left his bedroom the same." Shem sighed. "He'll know, Mari. Good idea." "Maka," Kalia said, holding out her arms. "Oh, come here, you sweet thing," Mari said, taking Bosco's daughter from Shem. "You going bye-bye? Is it time?" Shem nodded. "Come on. Boscos is horse hunting." "He's what?" Shem chuckled. "Just come say goodbye. I promise I won't make you get on a horse yet, although the traveling breeches do look nice on you." "Shemzinus!" Mari exclaimed. "Looking at a woman in breeches!" Shem blushed. I mean," Mari burst out laughing. "You're still so easy sometimes. I'm sorry, but I'm really not. Thanks, Shem. I needed the laugh. The look on your face." "You're awful, you know that?" he said, playfully slapping her arm as they walked down the hall to the large gathering room. "Making me feel like a 20-year-old again." She was just opening her mouth to give him a smart comeback when she noticed through the window a horse racing to the estates. "Who is that?" Shem stepped in front of her and opened the door. Mari and Kalia followed. "It's Q!" Shem sprinted from the front porch. Q had brought the horse to a stop right before Kala and Boscos. Mari jogged after him awkwardly, still carrying her grandniece. "Q!" Shem shouted. "What's wrong?" "Soldiers, Uncle Shem." Dek and Zadok, on their borrowed horses, came to a quick stop behind him to listen. "What?" Shem cried. Kala stared at Q. "How? Where?" Q shook his head, trying to catch his breath. "Not too many," he finally managed. "Hifadi thinks they're lost. Came out of a wrong canyon. Maybe got diverted by one of the walls looking for a shortcut." Shem pressed his lips together. "How many?" Kala asked. "Around 15, Q panted. "I counted the number of glints on their swords approaching the cliffside, not turning to any other canyons. We may have been spotted." Shem closed his eyes and thought. Mari finally reached them with Kalia, and Noria took her daughter from Mari and held her close, as Mari read the bleak faces of those around her. "Oh, dear," she murmured quietly. "My mind is desperate for distractions, but not like this." "Papa," Bascos whispered, "do we still go, or—" "Uncle Shem," said Q, finally breathing normally, "Mr. Hafati says it's time for the sergeant major to come. Only the sergeant major can fix this. The day to pull out your training? Perrin's orders? He said you'd know what that meant." Shem opened his eyes. "He didn't really say that, did he, Q?" Q nodded. "Papa, what does that mean?" Bascos asked. Jatsi and Mari held their breath. Shem, nearly petrified, only muttered, "I can't do it." With speed no one anticipated, Kala spun Shem to her and gripped him by both arms. "Listen to me. This is it, Shem. Sergeant Major Zenas, you never did turn in your resignation, remember? You were always supposed to remain a soldier. Hugh Gleese told you that, and so did Tuma Hafati. The day would come, remember, Shem? The day would come when your skill would preserve Salem for one more day. If you don't stop those soldiers, we may not get everyone safely to the site. They can't be allowed to return to Lemuel, Shem. If he finds out too soon, Salem perishes. Remember his dream, Shem. Accept it. Do it. Face the world." "You're supposed to hold me back from the world," he nearly shouted at her. "Not today," she exclaimed. "Today I'm shoving you to it." Jatsi nudged her mother. "What is she talking about? Whose dream?" Mari shrugged. "I have no idea." Dek, Zadok, and Bascos shrugged as well. "Kala," Shem exhaled, "you know how I feel about this. I never again wanted to take a sword. So why did the Creator allow you to learn to use it so well?" She rounded on him with surprising gusto. "To defend this people, Sergeant Major. Even Perrin saw it in his dream." Now Mari and Jatsi stared at each other, and Bascos and Zadok blinked in surprise. Shem closed his eyes again. "I know you're right, Kala," he said. "I could never do this without you. Thank you, my love, for always pushing me in the right direction." Kala shook him. "Thank me later. Get a horse and get up there." Shem opened his eyes, kissed her quickly, and headed to the barn. "Fresh horses, all of you men, you're coming with me." Basco's eyebrows went up. "We're what?" "It's all right," Kala assured him, pushing him toward the barn. Jatsi and Mari followed with Zadok, Dek, and Q. "You'll want to see this," Kala promised, jogging with them to the barn. "Perrin had a dream where he saw Shem fighting off soldiers at the cliffside, giving the Salemites another day to gather," she told them hurriedly. "Shem could do it because he was still legally in the army and wouldn't be breaking the Creator's decree that no Salemites fight at the ancient temple site. That had been Guide Hafati's and Guide Gleese's admonitions, to always remain a soldier, and Perrin, as the general of Salem, was given the understanding of why. Shem never wanted to believe any of it, but Jotha knew about the dream as well, and, well, there was more to it, but we don't have time. Grab a horse." Shem was already getting on top of a rare white Clark, powerful and rested. Silver was in his barn too far away, and Clark 14 was still out with Pato. "Bascos, take this one." Jatsi grabbed the reins of another strong horse and pointed to a third. "Q, try that one. Zad, over here." Without a word, Shem rode swiftly out of the barn, the men following him through Dek's pasture lands. Kala watched for a few seconds, then grabbed the reins of the painted horse with the half-brown face. "Mama!" Huldah exclaimed. Esther dropped her pitchfork. "Kala!" Jatsi cried. "What are you doing?" Kala struggled to mount the saddle-free horse, but soon was astride. "Kala, get down from there!" Mari ordered. But Calla was beaming. "Call me Granny, Mari, but I've always dreamed of watching my sergeant major in action. Ever since I was 14 years old, I wanted to see Shem Zenas fight. I can't miss this, Mari. Explain it to Lilla if I'm not back in time." Mari couldn't help but grin. "Then go, Calla, go!" Calla kicked the horse and took off, following the men already well on their way. Jatsi, Noria, Hulda, Esther, and Mari jogged after her to watch in awe. "I can't believe she's going," Jatsi said, shaking her head at the diminishing figure of Calla, about 100 paces behind the men. Noria chuckled. "Maybe if she wasn't wearing breeches, she wouldn't have gone." "It's so hard to mount a horse in a dress," Esther agreed. "Maybe that's why we don't usually wear breeches, unless we're traveling," Mari smirked. "Too tempting to rush out and go do something brave and foolish. Ride, Calla! Go watch your sergeant major! Then come back and tell me all about it, but not too much. Just like Lek, I don't like the bloody parts." The women and girls chuckled. As the riders entered a dip in the hills and vanished from sight, Mari scoffed quietly and then exclaimed, "So that's why Perrin needed to see Jothan." Jatsi frowned. "What was that?" "Just before Perrin passed," she explained to the family around her, "he requested to see Jothan Hafati. They met, just the two of them, and I never knew what they talked about. But I did find a note Perrin had left, his list of what to finish. On it were the words, 'Jothan about Shem.'" She shook her head in wonder. "I never knew that he dreamed about Shem. I wonder how long ago that was. It must have been about this day." Hulda Zena squirmed. "Papa didn't want to do it." Mari nodded confidently. "Your papa can and will do it, whatever it is. He always did his duty, especially when his commander told him to." She sighed, slightly resentful that she didn't know about Perrin's dream. "Oh, but I'm dying to know what it is. Ah, well, there's work to do, everyone, and I've got a pantry to reorganize." And that is the end of part 1 of 12 of chapter 5, the 34th day of planting, the longest day. Again, that was the end of part 1 of 12. We're all going to get confused. Thank you.